Hi, my name is Sadia Al-hilo, and I am presenting with Wendy Boone. We are doing our presentation on the Republic of Chad in Africa. And more specifically, we are taking a look at the food crisis in Chad and what the World Food Program is doing to alleviate food crisis in schools, specifically within Mayo, Chad, which is located in the Sahel region. So to start things off, we're just gonna give some background information on Chad. So Chad is believed to be one of the birthplaces of mankind where the human species originated. And it was once ran by kingdoms, but it was conquered by France in the early 1900s. And it was ruled by France until 1960, in which Chad gained independence from France. The first president was Christian, which caused uprising from the Muslim north. And the current president today is Idris Deby, who came into power in 1990. In 1996, Deby won the first multi-party election held in Chad and has faced rebel opposition several times during his reign as president. In 2017, President Deby did not hold elections, claiming that the government did not have enough money to hold them. That same year, the government was accused of using brutality against critics. So as you can already start to see, there is some corruption within Chad's government. President Deby has forcibly been holding power for around 30 years. Economic history, Chad is considered to be one of the poorest nations in the world. Chad has been dependent on single cash crops and livestock, making the economy incredibly volatile. And majority of Chad citizens work in agriculture. So 83% are working in agriculture and farming, whereas only 17% is working in government and industry. Chad became an oil producing country in 2003, and its economy has greatly depended on oil production ever since. Social history, Chad has really struggled to form a cohesive nation, and this can be due to the variety of religions, ethnic groups, and languages present. There are currently over 440,000 refugees that have relocated to Chad. Many of these refugees are coming from neighboring countries, such as Nigeria, the Central African Republic, and Sudan. Chad is also home to 100,000 internally displaced individuals, and all of these various groups are in need of the limited resources, which in turn causes conflicts between various groups. Chad is dependent on outside resources, such as foreign governments and non-government organizations, to provide these resources. As you can see here, this is just a graph we provided just to show you some of the different languages spoken within Chad. And of course, this graph was taken from 1993. So as they've gotten a huge influx of refugees from neighboring countries, we could definitely see that this number has gone up. As far as gender differentials go when it comes to social history, due to the poor protection and social connections, poverty and conflict have had severe impacts on women and children. Oftentimes men are away at war, and so women are left to do all of the field work, care for the children, and manage the home. Maternal mortality rates in Chad are some of the highest in the world. However, the fertility rate is also one of the highest in the world. So pregnancy is incredibly common. However, they do not have resources for women to practice safe labor and childbearing. There is a lack of protection through social circumstances, policies, and legal institutions for women. And then some statistics for you guys. 3 out of 10 women are married by the age of 15 years old. 2 out of 5 women have suffered from genital mutilation. And 4 out of 5 women aged 14 to 24 are illiterate. And then some demographic information. Chad ranks 186 out of 189 countries on the Human Development Index. The average life expectancy is just over 53 years. So when you're looking at that in context with the United States average life expectancy is around 85 years. So 53 years is incredibly young. 75% of the country lives in rural areas, with only 2.2% of those living in rural areas that have electricity. The gross national income per capita is only $1,750 per year. And the UN reported that over 66% of Chad's population lives in multidimensional poverty. On this page, we have just a table that kind of explains what multidimensional poverty means in regards to Chad. So on the far left-hand side, we see three different categories for dimensions of poverty: health, education, standard of living, and then the indicator that this is a dimension of poverty. So when it comes to health, Chad has a food crisis. Most of the country is living with malnutrition and lack of resources. Child mortality is incredibly high. And then years of schooling. School is not considered to be a right in Chad. It is a privilege, it's a luxury, and not many people can afford to go to school, whether that be adults or children. And then the standard of living. So for cooking fuel, the average household cooks with dung, wood, charcoal, or coal. And sanitation is not great in Chad. Drinking water, they don't have a lot of safe water to drink, and any large body of water is incredibly far away. And then as we talked about with electricity, most households in Chad do not have electricity. And then of course, housing materials are poor as well. So for geography and climate, Chad's total area accumulates to 1,240,000 square kilometers. So it is huge. And just to put that into context, Chad's total area is equivalent to Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, and Arizona combined. The country is entirely landlocked, surrounded by Sudan, Niger, Libya, Central African Republic, and Cameroon. And these shared borders are contributing to the varying cultural, religious, social, and economic beliefs that are found in Chad. And then also, because the country is completely landlocked, all major cities are incredibly far away from large bodies of water, which contributes to that lack of clean drinking water. 1/3 of the country is made up of Sahara Desert in the north. So as you can see in the picture, the third top half is incredibly dry, it's unfarmable, and most people do not live here. The Sahelian region, which lies in the very middle, is considered to be sandy and semi-arid, and is also incredibly difficult to farm. The Sahelian region is also host to some of the most conflict taking part in Chad. And then the Sudanian region is the southern third of Chad, where most of the population resides. It's a little more humid and more farmable than the other two areas. And it's actually considered to have the largest expanse of woodlands out of all the other Sahelian countries. So effects of constant conflict. Chad is continuously in conflict, and this is due to ethnic conflicts, regional conflicts, the refugee crisis, food insecurity, and a general mistrust in the government. One of the main causes for ethnic conflict is the disagreement between the Tama and the Zagawa. The Zagawa happens to be President Debi's ethnic group and accounts for less than 3% of Chad's total population. And in addition to that, people from the Zagawa hold most of the political power in Chad through government positions. So as you can see, there's that corruption. Not all people in Chad are being represented through their governmental power. The Zagawa reside in both Chad and Sudan, which has played a huge role in Chad's involvement in the Darfur conflict. So the Darfur region is in Western Sudan and has been accustomed to ongoing violence and death for over a decade. And due to this conflict, millions of Sudanese people are forced to flee their homes, and many of them have ended up in Chad. So where they're being kept, the 440,000 refugees are playing a huge role in this ongoing, growing food crisis in Chad. And then, as you can see, we already talked about how most of the population lives in poverty, so it's 87%. There are lots of single parent families because the men are away at war or they've died, or the mothers are not present due to maternal mortality. And then just the lack of food and supplies, and children's education is interrupted by this ongoing conflict. And so that's where the World Food Program comes in. The World Food Program is an organization that works to provide food to communities that are struggling to maintain nutrition for the population or regions that are in conflict and emergency. Every year, they are able to assist over 83 countries and nearly 100 million people. The World Food Program is funded entirely on donations alone, and they purchase 3/4 of their food supply from developing countries in order to help them sustain economic growth. According to the World Food Program website, the country of Chad has some of the highest levels of hunger in the world. The Sahelian region of Chad is one of the most heavily affected by hunger. So the World Food Program has a school meal program in Mayo, Chad, and they feed 1,800 students a day. 557 of them are female students, so less than 1/3. And then oftentimes the only meal that the students will receive that day is from the school meal program. Because not many female students are attending schools right now, they're providing extra food and cooking oil in order to incentivize families to send their daughters to school. And so now we're just going to show you guys a quick video that highlights the hunger crisis in Chad and the single parent households and how the women are left to take care of all the family matters.
Eastern Chad, about as remote and desolate as it gets. And yet, 300,000 refugees from Darfur live here in 12 camps scattered along the border with Sudan. Today, it's 45 degrees Celsius, but Halima, her daughter, and a neighbor are out in the blazing sun picking maquette. Like all those who escaped the conflict in Darfur, they are dependent on food aid to survive. But since January, they have been living on half the food they should be getting, so they have had to resort to foraging to survive.
كتب ده موفر كله القاعد ده من قصر ده الموفر قاعد كله من أكل ولا عندنا وفي بناكل شيء ما عندنا ولا قرش فني بمشي بكت ده كله بجيبه خطب كله بجيبه وبمشي مويه كلها هو بيجي أنا كل ركبه كله بوجاني وأنا عيال وولد ده عيال أبوي عيال.
Halima and her family fled Darfur 10 years ago.
بعربي بيتيت الأنطونوب بيتيت بحسين بجمال Al-hilo na niya, tayo, agalo bahim, agalo, maitin gaidin da pagna marak na da. Asa wala maawag da kullu ma dariba na ana harbi. O ma hindi na behime, al-hulgan za ta sigi na adre kaso. Kaba da mo pa Darfur wen narja. Ay la. Darfur wen na dole narja. Hasa na duti da. الليل بموت بكره بموت da.
Getting food thousands of miles out into the desert is an expensive challenge. It's also a race against time, because when the rainy season hits, the roads become impassable. But the reason these warehouses are almost empty is from lack of funding. Gaga Camp now holds 20,000 people. Markets have sprung up, and the Chadian government allows refugees to use the desert land to grow food. But drought and floods makes farming here nearly impossible.
ولا فول ولا ايش ولا درابة.
Maquette must be ground and soaked for several days before it can be eaten. Many survival foods have some nutritional and even medicinal qualities, but they are not cultivated, so the more they are picked, the further you have to go out into the desert to find them. Leftovers go a long way too. These sorghum cereal scraps are collected, dried, and pounded into a powder. Water is then added to make yet another meal. If funding doesn't come soon, then improvised meals like this will become increasingly frequent for Halima and her family. Worse yet, hunger and malnutrition will too.
As you saw in that video, life is really hard in Chad, and so we decided to focus our study in the Sahel area, and more specifically in Mayo. Mayo, Chad is an area which is the 16th most populous city in Chad, and it sits on the border of the Sahara Desert. Mayo has a population of about 20,000, mostly Muslim, although there are a few Christian churches located there. And many of the children are stunted, meaning they are so malnourished that their growth has stopped. And when that happens, it also affects their brain function, and it will affect them for the rest of their lives. So the problems that in Chad are so numerous that it was hard to choose what problem to focus our study on. But we decided to focus on the girls attending school when we realized that only 30% of the girls were attending school. And as Sadia pointed out, a lot of that is because they're expected to work in the house and work in the fields to help to provide food and to find food, to gather food like we saw in the video. And because the girls marry as early as 12 to 13 years of age, studies have found that girls who are in school will increase by 50 to 60% will marry at an older age if they have an education. So that's one of the reasons we chose to focus on education. So our research questions are focusing on why, with the WFP's food incentives for girls, why are 70% of the girls not attending school? And more specifically, what are the social and economical impacts for families with children who attend school compared to those who do not? So because girls get this extra food for their families when they attend school, we wanted to know why families would choose not to send them when food is such a scarcity. So some of the benefits of the school feeding programs are that it only costs 25 cents to provide a meal for a child. That's American money. Just 25 cents a day will feed a kid at school. And kids benefit from school meals as it helps them to focus on school instead of how hungry they are. Studies have shown that when kids are full, they can think more about what's being taught instead of when they're going to eat. The other benefits of school meal feedings are it provides health, education, and productivity. And they have found money-wise, it's $1 for every dollar spent. It's a return of 3 to 10 when they have the kids with education. The benefits also, it helps break the generational cycle of hunger and poverty, and it increases school attendance in impoverished countries like Chad. So these school feedings is helping more people to be incentivized to go to school. So for our population sample, we chose to interview 30 families with children. We wanted to be able to compare and contrast the differences in these families with 10 families that have just daughters that go to school and how that affects their social and financial situations in comparison to 10 families that may have only sons where they don't get the extra food. And with 10 families with both sons and daughters to see what those differences are and to be able to find ways to increase the number of girls attending school. So our methodology is first we will gain approval from the IRB and gain support from the local leaders in Mayo, Chad, to be able to conduct our study there, and to recruit from the school and from some of the churches the names of families that fit that criteria of all girls, all boys, and some of both. We will have to use local translators as neither one of us can speak the language. and we will gain informed consent from those who participate in our study. And we will be interviewing families and videoing them so that we can take the video back and translate and transcribe and code the information we find there. After that, we will compare the differences of these families, and then we will report back the findings to the participants and the leaders so that they can find, to help promote them wanting to send daughters to school. We'll also be reporting our findings back to the WFP so that they can see ways that they might be able to adjust their incentives to get more girls into school. So some of the questions that we wanted to ask were to ask why they don't send their girls to school, why, if they believed an education was valuable or not, and if they send their sons but not their daughters, why? Just some of these kind of questions to help gain an understanding of how we can incentivize them to put their girls in school. So the timeline for our study is we will write our proposal and submit it for IRB approval the first month, and the second month we will be busy making travel arrangements, getting interpreters and culture guides and a driver that knows the roads. And month 3 we'll be arriving in Chad to conduct the interviews for 3 weeks, and then month 4 we will be transcribing those interviews, and months 5, 6, and 7 we'll be analyzing and coding the data to be able to compare and contrast those results. And months 9 and 10 we'll be writing our study findings and results and disseminating and month 11 we'll disseminate our findings back to the participants and to the WFP. And then month 12 we will write up a paper to submit to journals and things that can help future studies. So the budget for our study isn't super high. We only have budgeted for $24,770, and our largest expense is actually transportation because they don't necessarily have cars, so we have to go to the capital city to get a car. You have to have a driver to drive you, and it has to be a 4-wheel drive car that can go through these roads that are they don't repair their roads like we do here. They have ruts and things all over, so you have to have this 4-wheel drive to do this. Next, we have our limitations and strengths video or slide. So the strengths for our CHAD research is that we have studied the background, the political, the different languages, so that we can have gained an understanding of the conflicts in Chad. And we have support from the WFP to work in the country with the people, and so that because they will know the area better. And we have local guides and interpreters helping us along the way to keep us with language and help us with those things. Some of the limitations that we have are language barriers, corruption in government, timeliness of interviews, because they will be more time consuming, lack of electricity for charging or filming is one of the concerns we have, along with the translation of our data and the accuracy of our data. So those are our strengths and limitations. So for future studies, we want, because we saw so many needs in Chad, we thought that we should see how language impacts and contributes to ongoing conflicts, and that maybe if they had a national language that was taught in all these schools, it could help create cohesion within the country. So that was something we thought should be looked at further. And what would further incentivize families to send their daughters to school? We're hoping with whatever we find that they can take that then and look at how to implement incentives for families to send their daughters to school. And one of the things that we found was important for this was when a woman is educated, she educates her children. She helps her children to learn. So to end this cycle of multidimensional poverty, it's going to take the women being educated so that they can teach their own children. Next. So our last slide is about the Share the Meal app. It only takes 50 cents to feed a child for a day. And so we're encouraging all of you to download this app, and the next time you go to buy a soda, think about feeding someone for a whole day for the price of that, or for 3 days, almost a week for the price of a soda these days. So download the app and share a meal. Next. If you want to know more about CHAD, here are some references that you can look at to be able to understand the incredible poverty found within their country. And we thank you for watching.